What's up, folks? Anthony Armstrong here, former NFL receiver and host of Believe in Commanders. And with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League. It's a league specifically created for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. Make your way over to prizepicks.com/believe and use the code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for a first deposit match up to $100. You must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details. Pick more or pick less. It's that easy. Prize Picks.
Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt, als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast from the Football Grad Network. I'm your host, Bryce Dunn, and joining me, as always, but across the water this time, is Manu Veth. Manu, how you been?
Yeah, I've been pretty good. Busy weekend. Stuttgart on Friday, Bayern yesterday. So good times, but happy to be back in Munich as well, my hometown. So it's really nice to be back in Germany, and I'm really excited for this podcast.
Yes, definitely. We're all excited, I think. And that means, obviously, Manu and I are joined, as always, with Chris Williams. Chris, how have you been? Not so much travel for you, I'm guessing.
No, I've still got a month, unfortunately, so I'm very jealous seeing Manu's back in Germany. But yeah, I've got a month to go, and hopefully should be at Stuttgart versus Bayern. And then a nice little weekend in Freiburg, Bryce, because I was so impressed when I went for the match day one that I'm going to take my family there for Christmas.
Sounds lovely. Yeah, very exciting times as we edge closer and closer to Christmas. But as Manu said, we do have a very special and a very unique pod this week. So we will touch on the Bundesliga as always, but we're going to have a bit of a Klopp special. Why? Because we've got a fantastic guest joining us in Raphael Honigstein. Rafa, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I'm sure it's been a very busy week for you.
Yeah, it's been busy. Thank you for having me. A little bit busy with launching Klopp's book and, of course, Champions League coming up for BT. So, yeah, interesting times, but that's what we want.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure this won't be the first or last pod that you're on about your book, but that's the way we want it, eh? So, I suppose, guys, let's touch a little bit on the Bundesliga this weekend before we jump in to our Klopp heavy special. Not the best week, really, for Klopp's old side in Borussia Dortmund. Chris, what exactly is going on here? They managed to lose on the Friday night game 2-1 away to Stuttgart. Alarm bells are ringing, no doubt.
Yeah, they are. And we've spoken over the last few weeks that even though the results aren't going the way, the play has been particularly not of a bad standard. And it was a gain on Friday night in flashes. The possession was very good. His distribution of the ball was okay. But once again, and I don't know how many times we've said this now, there was a calamity at the back, especially for the first goal. And then a little toothless up front. And I think those days of putting 4 and 5 past teams seem a very, very long way away now. And yeah, it's not looking particularly good for Peter Bosz. I don't think it's been helped for the circus now that's surrounded him by the fact that Bayern got rid of Ancelotti and brought in Heikens, and they've just flown and taken off. There's a lot of pressure on him at the moment. They've got a really crucial game midweek in the Champions League. You would expect them to drop into the Europa League. So yeah, it's not a good time. I've spoken to some people I know over out in Dortmund, and yeah, they're just a little bit down, as you would expect if you'd seen your football club go from the top of the league, dropping a little bit further. Is it a big crisis? Not 100% sure it's a massive crisis, because let's not forget, they're not the bottom of the league in a relegation zone. They just had a really bad, well, it's going to be September, October and November now, isn't it?
Yeah, Chris, they dropped 14 points in comparison to Bayern since Heynckes has taken over. That's...
And I think that's hurting Peter Bosz more than anything, the fact that this comparison's going on.
Yeah, it is. But I was at this game and talked, as many people have. Marcel Schmelzer was the only one who actually talked to the press extensively after the game, and they seem almost clueless about what's going on. And there's all these questions asked, of course, by journalists about Peter Bosz, the lack of a plan B, the fact that he's training less than predecessors have done, and the fact that the amount of sprint numbers are down, the amount of average kilometers are down, and it feels like Dortmund are playing. They didn't actually play that badly. They just, as you said, they played toothless, and you never really had a feeling that they would score a goal in this game. So it's, I don't know. I would say it's definitely a crisis, and when you sense the way the officials reacted, Borussia Dortmund officials reacted after this game, I think they're not considering firing Bosz. But I don't know how many more bad results the fans are going to accept. There's a real sense when you look at Twitter, when you look at the media, that the fans had it with Bosz to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, anyone that tunes into the podcast will know that this year we kind of predicted that Borussia Dortmund would have a good year and really kick on. Raphael, are you a little bit surprised just at the way that Dortmund haven't really taken on the challenge to get to the top of the Bundesliga and really bring it to Bayern, especially when they're they've had a bit of a transitional start to the year?
I think what's so surprising and what makes it so difficult for people to accept is the trajectory of Dortmund's problems, because going into the season, there was a lot of doubt. There was a lot of, concern that Bosz's system was not going to work straight away. The high pressing, the very high line that they seem to play, the change from the Tuchel style, change of personnel to a certain extent. But when they started so well, all these fears were allayed, and of course it combined with Bayern's complete loss of shape and drop off in performances under Ancelotti. And I saw a lot of people in Dortmund quite confidently saying, okay, this is going to be Dortmund's first real shot at a title since 2012. And I myself believed it. And since they've fallen away so dramatically, and Bayern have rebounded as strongly as they have, it's much harder to kind of get your head around it, because I think we expected it to happen the other way around, a slow start and then gradual improvement as they learn to get adjusted to the system. But the more Bosz seems to tweak it and reacting to the problems, the less of a shape and of a coherence seems to be happening on the pitch. So I think there is at the moment a general sense, and this goes beyond, I think, the 11 players. This also goes into the areas of Aubameyang and Mislintat and all the stuff that happens in the background of a club that is falling apart a little bit at the moment. And I think that is the big worry, that they're not just having a bad season, but having the sort of season where a lot of people seem to think, maybe I should move on, and maybe this is not really going to be a club for me where I can fulfill my potential. And that is the real worry, I think, for Dortmund.
Yeah, maybe just to add one thing, Raphael, to this. I get the sense that if they had the amount of points that they have right now, that is actually not the real issue. The issue is really just the last 4 games. Let's say they had dropped the same amount of points, but it would have been kind of consistent build-up, or maybe a game dropped here, a game dropped there. But it's the fact that this has been going on for such a long stretch now. I think that's really what worries people the most, and it's exaggerating all these things that you've just mentioned.
Yeah, and I would add to that some of the results in the beginning of this bad spell, you could maybe excuse and say, that they were a little bit unlucky. It didn't really reflect the game. I mean, the way they lost to Spurs, for example, they were, of course, quite naive and open, but they created enough. On another day, they draw that game, and we're talking about a completely different Champions League campaign. But now the performances have actually caught up with the results in a negative sense, and that's that's very depressing, and it puts Bosch, I think, in a very weak position because you don't see at the moment any real signs of improvement.
Yeah, Chris, talking about Bosch, you're obviously quite close to Dortmund. Would you see it as possibly a time to, change the man at the helm?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I would normally err a little bit of caution and maybe say, should they wait till the winter break? But you look how quickly Bayern acted and how quickly they've turned it around. And, as Manu said, they've made that 14-point gap up in essence, and now they're flying on top of the league again. And it's a difficult one, isn't it? I think we should see how midweek goes. If there's a poor display midweek, I would be expected to see him there for much longer.
Chris, if they play like they played against Stuttgart, there's no way they're going to have a positive result.
Oh no, and I was at Wembley for the Spurs game, and they were just picked apart at will, weren't they? Although they had the possession at times, and they were very good. And Yarmolenko scored a fantastic goal, and they did look a threat going forward. But the right hand side of defence was just torn apart by Kane and Son, and it's never looked the same since then for me.
I think at this point we need to move on to Bayern Munich and speak about them on Saturday. They managed a 3-0 win at home to Augsburg. Raphael, when people, we kind of raised an eyebrow a little bit when Heynckes came back to the club. A lot of people were suggesting that maybe he had been out of football too long. Tactics are going to be a bit dated and Bayern are going to struggle. But that doesn't seem to be the way at all at the moment. They absolutely breeze through this and seem to be going full steam ahead.
Yeah, I don't think there was any doubt that tactically, so much had happened in the last 4 years that Heynckes with his ideas would be old-fashioned. I don't think football has actually moved on that much. And in Peter Hermann, he has a guy who is pretty astute, and there's a reason why Bayern had to pay a lot of money to Fortuna Düsseldorf to get him out of there, because he basically does to Heynckes what Löw used to do to Klinsmann. He is the man who does a lot of the detailed work on the pitch and off it. Heynckes is the figurehead. Heynckes is the man manager. Heynckes is the guy who holds it all together. My bigger concern, if you will, if there is enough of tactical work really going on to get Bayern back to those levels. I think when he left, they benefited still greatly from Louis van Gaal's position football. They had players in Lahm and Schweinsteiger who had that system sort of almost in their blood, and they had players on the flanks who you just have to give the ball to them and something would happen. And then even when they played on the counter-attack, as they did so spectacularly well against Barcelona, they managed to adapt to different situations. I think with this team, which is a team that doesn't really know what kind of team it is anymore, I think to an extent, he's trying to set back the clock. He's trying to play 2013 football. A lot of emphasis on the flanks. Javi Martinez as a guy in front of the back four, protecting it. But I just don't quite yet see the same kind of understanding and rhythm and kind of control that they used to have before. I think a lot of it has been lost. And I guess the good news is that he still has 3 or 4 months possibly to get it right before the really important games happen. So for Bayern, it looks very, very positive. They managed domestically to win all the big games. They've got one left in Dortmund in the Cup. But at the moment, you don't even think that Dortmund will be competitive the way things are going. So Bayern have come from a situation where they looked as if they would have a disaster of a season by their standards to yet again being so dominant that they can really concentrate on the Champions League. So that bodes quite well for Bayern, but I really still need to see a bit more by way of collective improvement before we can talk of them, I think, realistically as Champions League challengers again. I think there's still some ground made up for that, and I think the Paris game will perhaps give us some clue just how quickly this team keep progressing, because so far not everything has been as convincing as the results. The results have papered over some cracks, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely go along with that. I think I spoke to Mark Lovell yesterday at the Bayern game, and he said something I 100% agree with. If that same game, the first 30 minutes, would have been under Carlo Ancelotti, they would have been whistling and boos from the stands. Jupp Heynckes has a little bit of a bonus because of 2013, and I think that what he's done is he's really getting the best out of all these brilliant individuals. And, the likes of Kimmich, for example, who carried the team. Arturo Vidal had a fantastic game yesterday, loaded a lot of the weight on his shoulders. But it wasn't a tactical masterpiece. It was basically a bunch of individuals showing the best. And these individuals are better than your average Augsburg side. So they really just carried it through that way. But it wasn't a brilliant performance by any means.
Hi, this is Rachel Fisher.
And this is Desi Jenikin.
And we host the Hollywood Crime Scene podcast. We're really excited to tell you about the best Christmas ever on AMC Plus, where every day feels like Christmas morning. From new holiday favorites like Elf and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation to modern and iconic family classics, you can spend the holiday season opening only the good stuff. And with new series, episodes, movies, and fresh content arriving every week, AMC Plus is the gift that keeps on giving all year long. Sign up today at amcplus.com. AMC Plus, only the good stuff.
It wouldn't be the holiday season if there wasn't candy, right? Celebrate the holiday season with the Holiday Crush. They've sprinkled candy with a holiday theme and fun-packed challenges every week for 5 whole weeks, finishing on January 4th. The more challenges you complete, the better your chances of unwrapping delicious rewards. So, are you ready to crush the holidays? Play the Holiday Crush now. Download it from the App Store, Google Play, or Windows Store for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Right.
No, definitely not. And that leaves the top 4 looking very interesting and a little bit unexpected in places after that game weekend, with Bayern Munich sitting on top, Schalke in second, RB Leipzig third, and Borussia Mönchengladbach moving up to fourth above Borussia Dortmund. But obviously we've got Raphael on the podcast today, and I feel that it's time for us to move in the direction that his book is taking. His latest book is out, Klopp, Bring the Noise. So it's going to be a Klopp-heavy pod, and I'm very excited. Me being a Liverpool fan, Chris being a Liverpool fan, we've been looking forward to this moment since we started the pod, I feel. But obviously, talking about Klopp's career in football, a lot of people kind of overlook that he was at Mainz, and that's where it all began. We're obviously very familiar with him running up and down the sidelines at Liverpool and in Dortmund, but lesser so maybe Mainz. Raphael, if we look at those moments, when he was at Mainz, I mean, what kind of manager, what type of coach, should I say, was he back then, and how much did he learn from his time there?
I think a lot of the stuff that he would later find success with at Dortmund, and at least the beginnings of it at Liverpool, can be traced back to Mainz, which was kind of a miniature version of Dortmund and a more miniature version of Liverpool, in the sense that I think he realized the importance of creating a kind of symbiotic relationship between the players, the fans in the stadium, but also the people around him. That success at that level, with those financial means, would only be found if everybody really bought into it. And family is not a word he ever used, but I think it comes down more to energy and to this ability to combine together, and in joining forces suddenly kind of free up extra energy that wouldn't necessarily be there. And his coaching is very much geared to that. It was always, from the first moment he coached, trying to get a reaction from the fans, but also from the players. So coaching for him is coaching also during games, trying to get the players to do stuff. And he feels that is his job. And I think he learned all these things at Mainz. And he learned also, I think, never to think of possibilities or challenges or potential signings or big targets, but rather focus at the job at hand, in the sense of first of all, getting the best out of the team he had and out of the players he had all the time, because he couldn't afford not to. Didn't have the money to, write off half the team and ask for new players all the time. And also to really, even though it is a cliche, I think it's just 100% true for him to really take every game as it comes, and to get that every game as it comes mentality, drum it into the players, because that's, I think, half the battle won. If you take every game with a similar seriousness, whether it's Southampton or Chelsea, whether it's Seville or Hoffenheim, I think that gets you a long way to doing your job properly. And it's something it goes against human nature to a certain extent. I think we all sometimes like to go the way of the least resistance. But if you get somebody to be so ultra professional, to really try his best every single time, he, I think, lives that. He is the role model for that kind of attitude. And talking to players at all these three clubs, I get a sense that he's getting a lot of joy in instilling exactly that mentality at Liverpool, which has been so successful at Dortmund, and of course on their own sort of level at Mainz before that.
Raphael, I think it's introduced quite early in the book, isn't it, where people at Mainz saw, and you've written it, they saw a coach behaving like the 12th man, effectively playing the game on the touchline. And this is a massive Klopp trait, which I think we've seen at Dortmund, and I've certainly seen at Liverpool a lot. But I found it really interesting when I was reading the book that he was laughed at first. There's a bit where he's pronounced at the press conference, Klopp will be the coach here, and all the press laughed at him. So he was never a natural successor, was he, when he took over?
Well, I think he would say he was a natural successor, and I think by now Heidel would say he was also a natural successor. But at the time, nobody could believe it. Nobody could believe that a player could just be a coach. I mean, it was basically unheard of. And certainly not a player who'd never done anything. I think it's one thing for Gianfranco Zola or for Ruud Gullit to go from player to coach, from one day to the next. But for Klopp, yes, he was the captain, but what had he done? And this is still a time in the mid-90s in Germany where players who were successful were then seen as natural coaches. I mean, it was clear to everybody that Klaus Augenthaler and Guido Buchwald and Lothar Matthäus and Karl-Heinz Rieder would be top coaches because they won the World Cup. Of course, they're going to be great coaches. And if you're a second division player who scored, 30 goals in his life and it's just this guy at the back, why would that make you a coach? I mean, so the idea, not just of Klopp, but sort of what he represented, was seen as ludicrous at the time. And I think one of his greatest achievements, in a way, is to change all that. Without him really being a trailblazer in saying, or in basically proving that it doesn't matter what kind of level you played almost, there would be no Tuchel, there would be no Nagelsmann. None of these guys would be anywhere near the Bundesliga if it hadn't been for Klopp's success. And I think that is one of his real big impacts that he's had, that perhaps is still underestimated by younger people who've grown up with the Bundesliga being very forward-looking and modern and happy to give young players a chance. This is something that certainly wasn't around 20 years ago, or less than 20 years ago. We're talking about 16 years ago when he was made coach.
Yeah, maybe one little anecdote from the time. I remember, I think it was still called DSF, Deutsche Sportfernsehen at the time. Mm-hmm. And they always used to, it was kind of like a soap opera, I guess, where they would very closely follow Mainz for the entire season, and Klopp would pick up players and drive them to training, and he was just one of the guys. And that's something, when I watched it, and I was in my teens at the time still, I thought this is very different from all the other coaches that you mentioned, or certainly very different from what someone like Matthäus would have done. It was completely against the norm, but it was captivating in a way, because he spoke the way he spoke to his players, the way he behaved. It was just one of the guys, really. And I thought that was like, whoa, this is interesting. I'm curious to see how that follows. And I think that built a lot into this whole Mainz tradition and the way that the club became really almost like an alternative club for some time.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think his relationship was really a player coach for a long, long time. But what's also, I think, interesting is that Mainz then made it sort of part of their DNA, not necessarily to get these kind of managers in who were sort of, matey or anything, but actually to get managers in who played a system that the club wanted and then look for the right players rather than doing it the other way around. And that's something that goes back to Wolfgang Frank and goes back to Klopp and his way of working. And again, I think that was hugely influential in the way that football was being looked at, because it used to be always, certainly in Germany, about the individuals. If you had great players, then of course you won games, and the coach's job was just to be like an Ancelotti, just to keep everybody happy and make sure that the best players are on the pitch and run a lot. And the idea that you could win stuff by way of a system, or at least, be competitive. I wouldn't say it starts necessarily with Mainz, but Mainz, along with Hoffenheim, were really clearly one of the teams that made that thinking possible. And again, I wrote a little bit about Klopp and that whole sort of brand of coaching in Das Reboot. But I think without him and without what Mainz did, German football would have taken a lot longer to sort of reach modernity. He really, I think, has huge merit and huge credit should go towards him for helping Germany kind of come to realize that football could be thought about in different terms. And it all starts with him at Mainz.
And also played in a very different kind of way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The pressing, gegenpressing is interesting because I asked Pete Kravitz, his number 3, where does gegenpressing really come from? And he basically says, in a way, it's something that everyone has done for a long, long time. And in German, it's called Nachsetzen.
Mm-hmm.
So, you lose the ball, you don't switch off, you put pressure on the guy. But of course, it's a completely different story if one guy loses the ball, or if one guy loses the ball and then suddenly there's 5 people bearing down on the poor left back who just got the ball back. And of course, that's when it gets interesting, and that's when it becomes very, very complicated. Because if you don't do it properly, obviously you leave huge gaps, and it's a suicidal kind of tactic. So the way I think they perfected it, certainly in the third and fourth Dortmund season, made it suddenly, I think, a kind of realistic tactic. Before that, I think it was too avant-garde, too difficult to pull off, too draining in terms of the physical and mental demands. And it's only once you do it that people think, okay, here's a proof of concept. And, even at Mainz, because they had terrible players, they scraped by. They came 11th twice, which was an amazing success, but then they were relegated. So I think you then still need to actually go and win something playing that way before people really think, this is actually a viable strategy for us. And he did it. He did it before Rangnick, and he did it in a way that also was able to communicate very sophisticated ideas in a very simplistic language that didn't sound patronizing to people, that didn't sound academic. Everything that Rangnick sort of got wrong in talking to the public about his tactics, Klopp got right. And again, I would say from a German point of view, that's why he's been so hugely important for German football, because he managed to get those ideas across without offending or losing half of the audience. And they're thinking, this is just really boring academic stuff. Leave me alone.
I think that's really fascinating that you point that out, Raphael, because I remember Ralf Rangnick, he was in ZDF, right, when he had that sports studio, at the sports studio, and how afterwards he was labeled the football professor because half the people that watched that show didn't understand what he was talking about, right? Yeah. And the reaction in German football is always, if I don't understand it, then it doesn't make sense. And I think that's really what Klopp did so much better, in a way. It was his presentation more than anything else, that he's always been so good in just in really simple terms, explain it. And I think that's really why people also really flock to him.
Yeah, he's a fantastic communicator. And you could just see when he had that success as a TV pundit for ZDF at the Confed Cup 2005, at the World Cup in 2006, that if there's a guy who can talk like this to 80 million, then you could get a really good view or understanding how he would communicate to his players. And I think without that, Dortmund never quite have the courage to go for him, because when they go for him in 2008, he is a second division coach. I mean, it's unthinkable now. Let's see, Bosch gets fired tomorrow. Would Dortmund look in the second division to get a coach there? Not in a million years. But back then, they realized that this guy has something, and he has enough of a charisma and enough of a force of nature to get these ideas through. And that they even used him, something I kind of forgot maybe or didn't realize, they even used him sort of as an advertising. You know, he became the testimonial for Dortmund. Like, they didn't sell enough season tickets. They put him on the banner, on big outdoor advertising, and people suddenly thought, oh yeah, well, Klopp is there, it's going to be fun, it's going to be exciting, I'm going to buy tickets. So it really is a story that, even though it's not that long ago, already seems kind of fantastical and almost a bit of a fairy tale, and it would be impossible to repeat today.
Yeah, I think also people always remember Dortmund as a big club, but when Klopp went there, Dortmund were almost bankrupt, and well, pretty much were bankrupt and were really rescued at the last minute. And then he went there, and I think people almost forget that short period of time where Dortmund were on the brink of no longer existing. And I think that's something that when you talk to people, like, Dortmund's always been a big club, I'm like, well, yeah, not really.
They certainly underestimate just how much trouble Dortmund was in, and how much the fans, I think, had begun to lose confidence in the club. Again, this is something that I didn't really sort of remember that well, but the people I talked to at Dortmund, they said, the football was so bad under Thomas Doll. People were so tired. There was like really slow possession football. It was going nowhere. They're 8th or 12th in the table. They just had kind of lost all excitement about going to the games, and Dortmund were in real danger of becoming sort of a nothing club in the middle of the table. And that, reading that again just made me think of Liverpool and the relationship that the fans had to the football there under Rodgers in his last year, and the complete sense of sort of deflation, and there is no point going because it's going to be another season of nothingness. And Dortmund were really in a very similar spot before he took over there in 2008, and it was very, very short space of time, things changed and improved quite dramatically. First of all, the football, people got very, very excited, and they finished in 6th, but it was seen as a big success, and then they finished in 5th, and of course, the next season already, they won the title. So it's going to be harder to replicate that kind of rapid improvement in the Premier League, where you have much more depth at the very top, and it's going to be a harder job displacing the teams ahead of you. But at the same time, you could see that there is stuff happening and things are going in the right direction, and some of the boredom and kind of depression has already lifted, that people have already kind of forgotten about it because it's already gone for such a long time. I think people already, don't even think about it anymore. But it was almost as bad as it was with Dortmund before he got there.
Well, that's it. It was in 2008 when Klopp joined Borussia Dortmund. Obviously, as you had said, Raphael, things weren't great under Thomas Tuchel, and they had finished 13th in the Bundesliga. But just to ask you, Raphael, taking it more from a Jürgen's point of view, did he feel a lot of pressure, a lot of stress? Did he worry much about how he was going to get on it? A club that were obviously in a higher position than what Mainz were, but also the fans were hoping that he would be almost, a breath of fresh air at the club. Did he put much pressure on himself?
He doesn't strike me as a guy who puts a lot of pressure on himself or thinks of coaching in terms of pressure and worries and stuff. I really think he enjoys what he does. He enjoys working with players, and he has that really amazing ability to come back from a big loss, Sevilla in the Europa League, or or a big heavy defeat in the Premier League and comes back and thinks, oh, that's so great. I'm at Anfield. I can train with these amazing guys, and we got a chance to win the next game in 3 days' time. I mean, that's really his way of thinking. I think it's informed by his experiences, where he's been in many difficult spots and always found a way to bounce back. It's informed by his religious belief, I think, where he sees kind of a bigger picture and thinks, this is just football. At the end of the day, we're all really blessed to be doing this. There's no need to worry about stuff you cannot change that happened already. Let's concentrate on what we can do going forward. And he's got this unbelievably positive outlook on things, but positive in a more maybe authentic and genuine sense that we have seen from some from some managers who always seem to smile and have that kind of almost sort of California type fakeness about them, where you just don't really believe it. With him, you do. You absolutely believe that he doesn't think about what could go wrong and could I lose this game and what happens if I lose another cup final. Just, I don't think the guy thinks in that way at all. And all self-doubt and all these problems, I think he leaves that to the number 2, number 3. They, I think, second guess themselves a lot more, and the football a lot more than Klopp. Klopp just believes that if you keep working hard and do stuff the right way, then you get right results. And of course, in his 16 years, ultimately, he's always been right. There's fluctuation, there are bad spells, there are big setbacks, but by and large, it's worked for him. And I think he has that tremendous confidence that comes from a guy who, for 16 years, basically has had success by and large. And even when he hasn't had success, doesn't go up twice on the last day of the season. Huge blow. You think Mainz will never get promoted again, but then the third time he does it, or he goes down and then doesn't come up, or he finishes 7th with Dortmund in his last season. Even all those things, I think he kind of turns them around and said, A, it could have been worse. B, I learned a lot from it. C, it taught me things to do differently, so it won't happen again. He is really, I think, in that sense, a very remarkable coach and very different to, certainly a few coaches that I've discovered, who put on a great show, but or you just know that they're quite insecure and second guess themselves all the time. And then they become very political and play little games to sort of fortify their own position and worry about a lot of these things. And he just does not. He just does not care. The guy is totally in harmony with himself. And that is hugely attractive feature, I think, for anyone working with him, because you feel that it's fun working with a guy who is just so relaxed about himself.
I just wonder, that last season at Dortmund, Raphael, that's maybe when they slipped down to 18th and things looked really dire. That was, I think, the only time ever I've seen press conferences with Klopp where he looked actually worried. And for a time, maybe even he didn't feel like he had the answers anymore. And that was, of course, also the impetus what made him decide to leave Dortmund ultimately. How do you see that time? I mean, it's a hugely interesting time, and Dortmund gave him a ton of confidence to get it right, to set it right. But it's just, I remember that so well, because I remember certain press conferences where he looked absolutely crestfallen at times. And yes, he always had that energy to get himself back up, but I just have it right in front of me, a picture right in front of me, where he almost looked a little gray and just had that really long face. And that was really the only time I've ever seen that.
Yeah. Well, of course, you have to worry if you're 18th in the table. You cannot quite shrug that off after half of the season. And I think he was also getting very annoyed that he was constantly sort of being blamed, or people were saying, so asking the big fundamental questions, the system, it no longer works. The training is too hard. He ruins the players, asking too much of them. I think you hear that once, you hear that twice, you hear that 30 times or 50 times during a season. I think after a while, your tolerance levels threshold becomes quite quite low. And of course, he did have those big arguments with journalists and became very aggressive and abrasive. But I think looking back at it now, he has decided, I think, two things for him. One is he's taken advice from people who look at stats and look at numbers and look at expected goals and all these things for a living, analysts, people in betting, and they all tell him, and this happened both at Liverpool and also at external sources, a third party, that Dortmund's first half of the season was basically a freak season because they scored not nearly enough goals relative to the chances that they created, and they conceded a ridiculous amount of, didn't concede that many goals in total, but they conceded a ridiculous amount of goals relative to the chances they conceded. So, in fact, there's a good case. It's very unrewarding or unsatisfying, I think, for us as journalists who want to tell a story always. We're storytellers, and we like to put things in a story. It's a difficult thing to say or to admit that maybe it was just the unluckiest season a team had played for a long, long time. But the numbers, and I've heard this from enough different people to believe that, not from him, but really from people who are not, involved in this personally, back it up that Dortmund just got ridiculously unlucky in the first half of the season. Talking to Kravitz, of course, he says there were certain small things that needed to be done, and once we got them, you immediately saw the bounce back, and then we had this fantastic results, and we finished seventh. So I think looking back, he probably doesn't think that he did much wrong. And I think, again, that is why he's quite relaxed thinking about it now. My sense, and this is the sense I also got from Dortmund, was more that the stuff that really hurt their results. And I'm not talking about relationships, because this is a different story. After 7 years, I think the relationships were perhaps a little bit strained and something needed change. But the actual football wasn't that bad and was impacted by stuff that were, to an extent, I think, not within his control. Lewandowski leaving, Immobile not being the perfect replacement, Hummels having a terrible season at the back. And one of the most remarkable things that actually I found doing the research is Hummels. I asked Hummels, how was it? And because Dortmund was saying the World Cup was a huge problem for them because you had these Dortmund players, only one had played, but the others came back feeling like they were World Cup winners, and it had a negative effect. Hummels said, my problem was different. My problem was that I came back. I wanted to be the captain, wanted to be a leader, but I played crap football. So I couldn't really tell anyone anything, which I thought was really disarmingly honest. Right. And Klopp doesn't seem to have suffered in terms of his confidence, in terms of his playing ideas. I think he's kind of ticked it off as a kind of perfect storm, a set of circumstances that weren't entirely within his control, and it ultimately necessitated a new start. And I don't think he feels that he's necessarily done anything wrong. And that's why it doesn't seem to have any lasting impact on him in a negative sense.
Raphael, do you think the fact he's got no lasting sense of him comes from what went before? Because in the book, I think one of the most captivating chapters of the book is chapter 11, 1, 2 and almost 3, where you get from the very first page of that chapter just the feeling in and around Dortmund when things started to get particularly good. And, it says that 80,000 punch-drunk, screaming supporters. And, I think when people think of Klopp in Dortmund, they think of these really good times. And do you think in a way that because he's got these memories to look back on, and they were so very good memories, and it almost ended with the best memory of all, but unfortunately they were beaten by Bayern Munich for Dortmund fans in that game. Do you think he carries the success in his own mind because he thinks back to how well it was at Dortmund for those few seasons?
Yeah, there's that, and I think there's another factor which surprised me a little bit before I researched it, is this idea that he's got, is that you're in it not just to win stuff, but you're in it to create stories. Christoph Biermann from Elf Freunde actually pointed me to a book he did on football in the Ruhr area, and he interviewed Klopp for that. And Klopp tells him football is about sitting together and talking about games. Where were you when we beat Malaga? Where were you when we won that game? Do you remember how we felt? And there are enough of these big games, even when he didn't win, when they lost at Mainz, at Dortmund, and now beginning, to build a similar kind of canon at Liverpool with the Dortmund games and the Man United games and the Man City game and the Chelsea games in the league. And I think that's what he draws strength from, creating these kind of extraordinary moments of happiness and of that kind of emotional joy of football just reaching its peak and its crescendo. And he wants to, like all adrenaline junkies, he just wants to create that again and again and again. And I think that's why he's in it. I think that is where the passion for coaching comes from. It's more, of course, it's the winning, but I think it's almost more like these special moments when things happen that makes it all worth for him. And because his teams play a certain way, and for whatever reason, make these things quite commonplace, is why he seems to be so happy, because he's basically a guy doing what he enjoys. And it keeps happening for him. For some people, it's money. For some people, it's titles. I think for him, it's that. And of course, he's not a romanticist in the way that he only wants to have, super exciting football and no results. He wants to win. But I think that's almost kind of the bigger issue for him. He wants to create experiences and remember experiences and be part of something that is almost kind of eternal and historic. And again, I think Liverpool, in many ways, is a perfect fit for that, because they, I think, historically, traditionally think in similar terms and have been in similar situations very, very often.
So obviously, it was in 2015 we seen Klopp arrive at Liverpool. I must say that I was very excited about the appointment. Chris, I can only imagine that you were rather excited as well about this extravagant, excitable manager coming over from Dortmund.
Yeah, it was the name that everybody wanted. Liverpool had gone so close to the title with Brendan Rodgers, and Luis Suarez left, Daniel Sturridge got injured, and looking back now, I feel a little bit sorry for Brendan Rodgers, because he lost something like 60 goals the season after, and you could tell Henderson, Coutinho were massively deflated from how close they'd gone. Gerrard had gone, obviously, and Brendan Rodgers was caught up in that, and that draw at Everton. I was surprised. We'd heard rumours he potentially would go, no matter what the score was at Everton, but he did go, and there was only one name on everybody's lips, and it was Jürgen Klopp. And I don't know, as a Liverpool supporter, deep down inside, I didn't think Liverpool would be the ones to tempt him back, but obviously over the moon when he did, and I think it's because we'd seen what he'd done at Dortmund, and anyone that had watched German football had seen what he'd done at Mainz. He's got that ability to galvanise not just the players, but he galvanises the stadium. I mean, you only need to look, and Raphael would have seen this straight away. His first game when he was away at Spurs, and there was German flags in the Liverpool end with Jurgen's Reds written on it. And then, we come back, and I'm a believer straight away. He almost turned the negativity around in the club, and overnight, I think. In fact, I would probably say it was overnight, and everybody knew what they were getting, and they'd seen him get to a Champions League final, and they'd seen him win Bundesliga titles and Pokals. And yeah, I don't think you would have found a better fit for a manager than Jürgen Klopp at Liverpool.
And Raphael, what was it about the Liverpool job that appealed to Jürgen Klopp? I mean, I'm sure there was many clubs calling him up and showing an interest, but why Liverpool?
I think because of that emotional dimension to it, the ability to take a club that's been punching below its weight in terms of results, but also in terms of the pull it had on its own fans and the kind of diminished stature that it had in world football, and to put it back on the map again, domestically and internationally, and to do that all at a blue chip name, and also a name, I think, that from a German perspective also holds a special kind of appeal, because whoever is interested in football in Germany is of a certain generation, who's not 30, 40 or 50 now, would have, maybe not 30, but let's say my age, 40 and 50 and older, would have grown up with a certain fascination for Liverpool, just as now people have some kind of affinity for either Barcelona or Real Madrid, or maybe slightly younger people for Man United. So it is a club that kind of captures the imagination if you are interested in football, and especially for Jürgen, who always talks about the ideal of English football, so an idealized version of the noise and the tackles and the mud and the rain and no fouls being given for 90 minutes and that kind of stuff. And of course, Liverpool might not actually have been as advertised when it comes to the atmosphere, for example, in the ground. And you could see him, I think, struggle a little bit to getting used to a reality that perhaps wasn't as exciting as the idealized version of it. But it's still enough of a pull and enough of a challenge, I think, to get him really going. And I personally think that it was a no-brainer for him and for the club. It's almost funny, I think, especially for us who have followed German football closely, that it was between him and Ancelotti for the job, because God knows what would have happened with Ancelotti in charge. You just cannot really conceive of him having any sort of real impact the way that Jürgen has had, with all the ups and downs, and the kind of momentum and energy that he has been able to create. So I think it was always a perfect match. And of course, to consummate that marriage, we just need now offspring in terms of a trophy or two.
Yeah, most certainly. And he's into his second full season there. Yes, he might be sitting at the top of the table with Liverpool, but I think it's definitely an improvement on where we were with Brendan Rodgers. Raphael, what do you feel needs to happen at Liverpool for them to possibly get the title? Is there anything that's not quite worked out or lacking there that you think that he will eventually put right?
Yeah, I think it's obvious what's lacking. I think there are individual and collective issues, and there are issues in terms of the squad relative to some of the teams above them. I think Liverpool are playing catch up. They've been playing catch up in terms of squad and individual quality for a long, long time. In 2013, by virtue of an happy accident, they got very close because they had three front players who were at the top of the game, who were competitive, and you had a Gerrard on the pitch. But it wasn't quite enough. Now, I think you're coming back to that moment where up front, this is a team that can hold its own against the very best, can even have a big impact, I think, in the Champions League, but doesn't quite have enough quality throughout the squad to carry a title challenge realistically, in my view. So you need to strengthen. There's only so much I think a system can do for you if your goalkeeper is not quite top class, if you are struggling to have enough depth in the centre-back positions, if perhaps there isn't a real dominating midfielder who's real top class, but you have like three or four all on a similar level. I think it's testament to Klopp that he's managed to take players that others had written off completely and said they were never, ever going to be good enough, and got them out there and they perform. I mean, Lovren, for all his deserved criticism has done reasonably well under Klopp so far. Moreno, I think, is a great example of somebody that everybody wanted out, and Klopp said, hold on a minute, this guy can play. I'll work on him for a year or two and see what happens. So I think he's managed to squeeze a lot of football out of this team, but more football needs to be inside the team. And I think ultimately that comes down to a bit of backing from FSG. You either have to be super smart like Dortmund and find players when nobody else is looking, and they're huge successes, or you have to spend big and buy sort of names that will improve you straight away. And that's where the challenge is. And I think if that happens, if FSG believe in him as much as they have done so far and continue to back him, or perhaps even decide that they can trust him so much they want to invest more money in an effort to get closer to the cities and Man United, then I think they can actually at least get to the point where they'll be in the conversation in a more natural sense. I think right now it is just not realistic to really see them as challenges. But of course, Klopp can't say that because he doesn't want to destroy the hopes and he doesn't want to destroy the momentum that he's trying to build up. And lastly, because he doesn't think in those terms, because he wants to first win every single game and then see where you end up. That's a strategy that proved so successful at Dortmund, and I think he wants to do exactly the same. Let's see if they can build up a bit of momentum before Christmas and then carry that through this very difficult spell, which last year and the year before didn't quite work out for him. Let's see if they've learned from that and have enough depth this time to deal with it a bit better.
Raphael, as a head coach, what do you think the biggest thing he'll have learned from last January and last winter's transfer market would have been?
I don't know how much he's learned from the transfer market, because this is still a mystery that I haven't been quite able to get to the bottom of. Who really buys players? How does it really happen at Liverpool? I know that Klopp is in no position to scout players. I mean, he will not be able to tell you now, who is the best centre-back in France that Liverpool can possibly get. That's not his job. It's never been his job, and he doesn't see his role in doing that. So you need to rely on your technical department, on your sporting director to provide solutions. And if he says, which allegedly has happened, that it's Van Dijk or absolutely no one because we can't find anyone, then he takes that and goes with it. So you need the people below them who are paid to do their job properly. And then, of course, you need FSG to back that judgment. I don't think that Klopp ever said, I don't want any new players because everyone I have is so brilliant. He might say that to the players. He might say that publicly, not to let them down and to keep them on his side. But I don't think he would have ever said that internally. Don't buy me any more centre backs. We're so good at the moment. So I still quite don't know the dynamics there. So I don't think it's necessarily down to him what happens in January. It's down to the ingenuity of the technical department and of FSG's ability to turn people's heads. I think they've shown themselves quite committed, more than I expected, in the way they pursued both Van Dijk and Keita. Let's see what happens if they push as hard in January, what Southampton will say this time. I think you have a reasonable expectation to be quite optimistic that the outcome might be different. What he's learned himself, I think, according to Kravitz, is, as I said, the importance of depth, the ability to rotate. I think the fact that they're no longer in the League Cup is not something he's hugely worried about. On the opposite, on the contrary, I think he's reasonably happy. Again, I think they will use every opportunity to have a bit of a winter break themselves by going away for a few days and creating a winter break the way that most clubs do. I think sometimes that's overlooked when we say, England, no winter break. There is actually usually a winter break. It just happens a little bit later. And just manage those numbers of games a little bit better. And I think there's even signs of Liverpool becoming more complete in the sense that they become better in possession and be able to mix it up a bit more. They can play a bit deeper. They can play a bit more on the counter attack. They don't have to, I think, correspond to that cliche of that super pressing team who just sort of press all over the pitch, which is never entirely true. But I think it's getting further and further removed from that. And they are much sort of smarter and more efficient in their decision making. And I think that is the next step up for them, to be able to win at 85, 90%, even though he will never admit it because he doesn't want the players to think that way. I think that is a crucial way forward. And I think, for example, the Southampton game now is very encouraging in that respect because it was very professional. It was the sort of game that Bayern play against Augsburg when they're not really that on top of the game because they don't have to be. And they can save a bit of energy and then maybe really be at the top of the game when they have to be in the next game, which is against Chelsea or for Bayern in Champions League. So I think that is a very good sign of progress being made.
Most certainly. Raphael, just one final question before we wrap things up. where do you see Klopp's future then? Do you see him possibly going to Bayern? Because they like to go and knocking and get their ways. It seems, would it be the German national job? Would he possibly go to Italy or Spain?
Well, I mean, he's told people close to him that he can see himself just coaching 3 clubs. That Mainz, Dortmund, Liverpool. It sounds like a sports movie kind of trajectory. Like Goal. Remember that terrible film series?
Oh God, yeah.
I think we all know what the soundtrack to that film would be because he's had the same song at all 3 clubs.
Wait, but are you saying he's going to Real Madrid?
No, not at all. No, I'm saying that. I mean, that would be, I think, enough of a CV if he manages to coach for 7 years, successively 3 times, with similar success or success relative to the job. Then I think he'd be very happy. I don't know if he thinks that far ahead in the future, realistically. I think he's happy that he's got the backing from FSG until 2022. They wanted to renew with him almost immediately, and he basically rebuffed them and said, come back when it doesn't rain quite as much in Liverpool. I want to think about this. And then he signed a new contract in spring. I think the next logical step for me would be to go and coach Germany. But that will only happen if in 2022 he feels his role in Liverpool is over, or if Liverpool fail, they need a change. I can see him staying a bit longer because I think 2 things could happen. A, if he does win the league, he becomes immortal at Liverpool. And I think then he becomes almost a Wenger type figure who can pick and choose his own terms and his own time of departure. Or if he doesn't win in those 7 years, I think he would have come close enough, often enough, for FSG to say, you know what, we've tried it a few times, we got very close, let's try a bit more. So I think there's a possibility that we will not see the end of his tenure just yet in 2022. Then afterwards, I think Germany is hugely attractive to him because A, it's a logical step. B, the language is a big issue for him. I don't see him going to Spain and Italy for that reason. And because also I think of the emotional connection. I mean, once, you think of it, at Mainz, you do it in front of, 30,000 people and a city of, let's say 300,000. In Dortmund, you do it in front of 85,000 people in a city of 500,000, give and take, plus a few people in the Ruhr, plus a few German fans, a few million. In Liverpool, you do it in front of 52,000, but there's basically millions and millions of fans worldwide, and a city going crazy if you do it. And in Germany, then you do it for 80 million people. So I think if you're in it for big stories, if you're in it for emotions, for making people happy and all that kind of stuff, being a national coach is the logical conclusion to his own particular story. But I think he's got a bit of time left before he'll do that. Let's see. It'd be also interesting because he said to me, through his agent, that he will only do his own book once he retires. So we'll see how long we have to wait. If it's 20 years or 25 years, but I'm sure it'd be very interesting. Once he goes, gets down to write all his stories up, I think it'd be one of the best football books ever.
I think one thing that you're saying is quite interesting because there's no better way to end a career than winning the World Cup, right? So that Germany link makes a lot of sense. If you're looking for stories, there is no better way to really finish off a coaching career.
Absolutely. It also bring his own career full cycle because he would be a little bit like Löw, a second division coach. Okay, Löw did, of course, coach in the first division a little bit, but without great success, who suddenly wins the World Cup. I think, as a fan of sports films as he is, I think it's almost impossible not to be somehow a little bit excited about that idea. But I think it's a bit too early for him to put it into place. And in any case, I think Löw might actually stick around a little bit longer as well.
Fantastic stuff. And I think that more or less draws us to an end of the pod. All we can say is thank you very much, Raphael, for coming on to the podcast. We really appreciate it. Obviously, people, please go out there and buy his book, Klopp, Bring the Noise. You can find it online, many different places, including Amazon and several others. But Raphael, what have you got going on this week? Where can people maybe hear your voice or see your face in the next coming weeks or days?
Well, we've got BT Sport, the Champions League, the Goal Show coming up, so that's going to be quite busy. Then I've sold out. I'm going to FIFA. But only the FIFA museum. So different people there, not the Expo.
Well, I thought we were getting a massive exclusive then.
Yeah, no,
and I thought you were getting a massive payoff.
Yeah, me too. I thought that'd be kind of a suitcase or at least brown envelope, paper bag to carry home. But I've got a feeling it won't be like that. No, the people from FIFA Museum in Zurich have invited me to introduce the book. They do actually really nice events with authors and talks and stuff. So I'll be going there on Thursday. And then we have a launch in Berlin on Wednesday next week with Elf Freunde and maybe a surprise guest on stage as well. So really looking forward to it. That's actually the fun bit of the writing wasn't always so fun. The research was, but now this is the fun bit, sort of introducing it to the rest of the world and getting the feedback, and also hearing from Klopp himself, which I did on Monday, that he really enjoyed it, which was the best thing really anyone could have told me, because it's, of course, a kind of strange sensation writing a book about someone who doesn't really want the book to be written. It is quite daunting in a way, and then to hear that he actually liked it, but came as a huge relief and made me very happy.
Yeah, I bet that is fantastic to hear. Once again, thank you for coming on the podcast, and we wish you all the best in the coming weeks and months with the book. And yes, obviously, we'll see you on the Goal Show as well. Guys, if you like the podcast, if you can just head over to iTunes and give us a bit of positive feedback, we greatly appreciate it. Apart from that, you'll be able to find an awful lot of content coming your way with Manu being now in Europe. And you just need to head over to Football Grad Live on Twitter or the Football Grad website. There's going to be many previews, match reports coming your way with a busy week ahead. But thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed the Klopp special, and auf Wiedersehen.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen, dich abzuholen.
We can get anything delivered from furniture to toilet paper. And now, adult beverages with Drizzly. Drizzly lets you compare prices from local liquor stores on a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits, then get them delivered right to your door in under 60 minutes. And right now, Drizzly's giving all new customers $5 off their first order. Just enter promo code EASY5 at checkout. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.